Hey guys, it's Bobby again from the GM's table, and we're doing another crash course. Anyways, if you didn't check out a couple weeks ago, throw a tag up there. We did part 1 of our crash course on Savage Worlds, and I quickly realized it was going to need to be 3 parts. Well, today's part 2, and part 2 is, boom, combat. Alright, so the first things we need to get into is toughness and wounds. So starting with toughness, this is a number that's essentially how much damage you can take before it starts to affect you. And to figure out your toughness, it is half of your vigor die size plus 2. So on top of that, I'm gonna try and get up really tall to get above this. This is a table provided in the book, and this really helps simplify how wounds and shake and everything work. So essentially what it is if you take enough damage equal to your toughness, you're shaken. If you go toughness up to 3 above it, you're still shaken. 4 above, we discussed raises in part 1. Every raise, every 4 above your toughness is a wound. Okay? 1 wound, 2 wound, 3 wounds. You can take, I'm gonna lower that now because I'm stretching and that kind of hurts. You can take up to 3 wounds before you go down. Now, what gets confusing, and I guess I'll have it come in down there. All right, same table, same thing. But the thing that gets really confusing I'm trying to get down here, for a lot of people is when you're already shaken, if you get shaken again, up here, if you get shaken again, you are wounded instead. Now, this is only for physical things. If somebody like taunts you to shake you, we're going to get into some of that stuff in part 3. That won't wound you because it's not a physical thing shaking you. But if you're shaken from any source for the first one, if the second shaken is physical, gonna get that out of the way, then you're wounded. Now, a lot of people seem to think if you get a raise while you're shaken, that's a second wound, blah, blah, blah. No, all it does is kind of stretch out the area for the first wound. Now, speaking of wounds, 3 wounds is as much as your character can take before you become incapacitated. Now, you can take 3 wounds, and then the 4th will incapacitate you. Now, because dice can ace and all of that stuff, again, talked about in part 1, any attack can potentially deal 5, 6, 7, 8 wounds and take you out in a heartbeat. And this is where that stuff we talked about last time of spending bennies is very, very important. Because one of the key things you as a player will be using to spend bennies, and maybe you as a GM, if you're going to keep the big bad alive longer, will be doing is soaking. Now, soak rolls are, you basically, whenever you take damage, you spend a benny. When you spend that benny, you then get to make a vigor check. Anything that gives you a bonus to all vigor checks or anything that gives you a bonus to soak rolls will apply here. Okay? And that vigor check, every success and raise will remove 1 wound from the attack that just hit you. So somebody hits you with an attack that dealt 3 wounds, just poof, that really hurt. Well, I need to roll to soak because I don't want to carry all those wounds around. Well, I'm going to have to choose immediately to make a vigor check and soak. If I rolled and got a 4, yay, I succeeded. I soaked a wound. What would have been 3 wounds is now 2 wounds. Maybe, hey, I got an 8. I soaked 2 wounds. Now what was 3 wounds is now 1 wound. And if I got really, really lucky and I rolled a 12, that's a success and 2 raises. That's 3 wounds. What's really great is if you soak all of your wounds from one attack, you're not shaken anymore. Because the thing is not only is it shaken and raises, you get wounds, you're still shaken too. But if you soak all your wounds, you also get to remove shaken. Now, on top of that, at any point you can spend a benny to just unshake, but this is a nice little bonus. But the thing to remember is you have to soak all the wounds from the attack. You're only soaking from that last attack. If somebody hit you and you took a wound, I'm hurt, ow, I have a wound, and somebody hit you again, I got another wound, ow, now I'm double hurt, I have 2 wounds. Wait, I don't want that. I'm going to soak that second wound. I rolled an 8. I could soak 2 wounds. Well, that attack was only 1 wound, which means you only get to soak as much as that last attack. That other wound, that's with you till somebody heals you. Now, the other big thing to remember about wounds is they give a penalty to everything you do from then on. So once you have a wound, one wound is going to give you a -1 to everything. This includes your rolls to unshake. We're about to cover that. As well as your vigor rolls to soak. So once you have a wound and say you decide to try and soak a later attack that might deal even more wounds, you're going to be taking that wound penalty to soak later wounds. It kind of creates this spiral effect where even avoiding damage gets more difficult as you're wounded. Now, I did say we're going to talk about unshaken. This is where we're going to cover it. So what is shaken? On top of spreading out that range for when you do and don't take your first wound, while you're shaken, you also can't perform any actions. And now, luckily, a lot of things aren't actions. Readying weapons from easy locations like holsters or sheaths or anything like that, that's a free action. Moving is a free action. Now in the newest edition, running might give you a -2 to everything you do, but it's not an action. So if you're shaken, you can still move, you can still run, you can still draw weapons. Your parry is still intact, which means you're still passively defending yourself. And probably one of the most important things to remember for new players, you can still get behind cover. Speaking of cover, I think this is a good time to get into hitting your targets. If you're in melee, you're going to try and target their parry. This is essentially the exact same thing you do for figuring out toughness, but instead of looking at your vigor, you're going to be looking at your fighting die. The biggest thing though is if you're not trained in fighting, that -2 untrained penalty still applies. This means that half of your D4 -2 plus 2 gives you a parry of 2. An untrained character, someone who's not trained at all in fighting, in combat, only has a 2 parry. Other than that, it goes up and it scales basically 1 for each die type going up. Exact same as vigor with toughness. The only difference is you can't be untrained in vigor. Now, ranged attacks, it's not the same. For ranged attacks, you're just trying to hit a location. Now, technically, this is a location where someone is, but it's a location. So this is a DC or a target number of 4. Now, a lot of people, when first learning this game, think ranged is just so powerful. It's so much easier to hit a target number 4 than, say, a parry of 6. Ranged is obviously so much easier. The big thing to remember here is ranged typically should be dealing with a lot more penalties. Yes, lighting penalties are going to affect everybody, melee or range, but ranged characters have to worry about range penalties. Weapons have a short range, a medium range, and a long range. Short range, no penalty. Medium range, -2. Long range, -4. Now, a lot of games, especially if you're dealing with anything once guns and bullets are involved, you're not going to have to worry about things beyond medium range typically, especially close quarter fights, anything you're going to be doing on one table with one normal, 1-inch grid map. But the biggest thing that people forget about that ranged has to deal with that melee really shouldn't is cover. I'm going to throw this chart up here. Cover makes or breaks ranged combat. Players should constantly be moving in and out of cover. You can also move, act, and then continue your movement, which means players hidden behind cover can pop out from behind their cover, fire, bang, 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 and then go back in cover in the same turn. Now, what if the guy you're firing at's doing the exact same thing behind cover? Well, that's where going on hold and stuff like that come into play, where you can interrupt people and all of that stuff. Don't worry, it will get covered. But right now, I'm just trying to keep these bite-sized chunks together. Now, there are a couple big advantages to melee, other than just parry is harder to hit and all of that. Melee characters can also get a lot more bonuses to hit. The biggest one is gang up. If you're used to older D&D, mainly 3rd edition, 3.5 Pathfinder, stuff like that, and you're used to what was called a flanking bonus, which used to be a +2, and in new Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is advantage, where you roll twice and take the better. Gang up in Savage Worlds is both simpler, more streamlined, but also more complicated. Because here's how it goes. If you're one-on-one with somebody, no bonus. For every additional friend you have right next to them, right within melee range of them, you get +1, up to a max of +4. So up to 5 people can be on one person, and everybody has a +4. Maybe you don't want to get hit. Maybe somebody got right up on you, and you're not equipped for it. Well, what you might want to do is defend. Now, normally in Savage Worlds, you get up to 3 actions. You can take 1 action at no penalty, 2 actions at a -2, or 3 actions at a -4. You can sacrifice all of them to defend. If you defend, it uses up all your actions, but it gives you +4 to your parry. If they get 4 above your parry, they get a raise on hitting you. And a raise on hitting you adds a +D6, an extra dice that can ace, that could go extreme if you're not lucky, to that damage. Now, one thing to remember is attacks hitting people can only get 1 raise. You only ever add 1 extra D6 to that damage. There's house rules out there, and some of the older edition rules that were things like you just do a flat +2 damage per raise and stuff like that. But if we're getting into house rules, everything's off the table. We could change anything and everything, and there'll be episodes on this channel about it. Subscribe, set up the Patreon if you want to support those kind of episodes. But right now, we're on Crash Course. We're on the basics. So just defend. +4 to parry. It can and likely will at some point save your life. So we've covered a lot. Combat is going to be a very dense video. I got my work cut out ahead of me for editing all this. But I wanted to cover one last maneuver, going away from melee, back to those ranged characters. Because just how melee with someone you can sacrifice all your turns to defend, those ranged characters could choose to sacrifice all their turns and not move. Defending characters can move. But ranged characters could choose to lose all their turns and not move to aim. And what aiming does in the newest edition is it removes 4 points of penalties to your ranged attack. Now, like I said, typically the thing that really actually hurts ranged characters are penalties. In older editions, it was just 2, but it was a +2. It could go into the positive. Aim cannot push an attack into the positive unless you have other things like edges or skills that get bonuses and stuff that are in the positive. But 4 points of reduced penalties is huge. Again, that is the difference between you just take the shot at the chest or you choose to shoot them in the head. Things like that. Okay, so I haven't even covered called shots. I'm gonna cover that a little bit next week. I'll gloss over called shots at the beginning. I also didn't properly and fully cover critical failures in part 1, so we're going to address those next time, as well as just round out the basics of what you need to know in part 3. But I'll catch you guys next week. Bye.